Welcome, folks. We are very excited for our first webinar, our learning series here. We are super fortunate to have Dr. Andrew Schwarz with us. I have worked with Dr. Schwarz for years, amazingly impressive, runs an AI institute at Louisiana State University, teaches AI, is an AI expert. And I just want to thank Jamie Mordew, who is our Chief Academic Officer, for setting everything up for this first webinar. We are going to be doing lots of these, so very excited to kick it off. So Andrew, I would love to actually just hand it over to you. We had reviewed the presentation in advance, which is very impressive. He has many slides. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A. We're going to leave about 10, maybe 15 minutes at the end to address those questions. Jamie and I will be facilitating those questions at the end. And if you see Jamie's face go offline, I will also be offline. So you don't need to look at our faces during it. But if you have those questions, please do pop them in along the way. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Andrew Schwarz. Andrew, take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Sasha. I appreciate that. So yeah, I know Sasha and Jamie for a number of years and always so impressed by what's going on. And I want to commend all of you who are either a student or interested in Newstate. Really, this is breaking the mold of what education is and how it should be, which is really thinking about these on-demand skills and the workforce of tomorrow. So you made a really good choice in where you're at. So that's why I'm excited to be here and talk to you about AI. So it really feels like the world is changing in fundamental ways. It feels like AI is just taking over the world. It feels like AI is here to take over business, and that really at the end of the day, we are going to be at a place where we simply don't know what our jobs are going to look like and what does it mean to AI proof our jobs. So what I want to do today is kind of talk about how we can think about and conceive of generative AI and give you some tips and techniques to help you facilitate your own job to make you more productive in everything that you do. So let's begin with some basic definitions so we can really understand what it is we're talking about. What is AI? So AI is a technological system that learns patterns, makes predictions, and generate outputs. At its core, the technology is very simple. At its core, the way that AI works is that it takes a bunch of data, it learns that data, it learns the patterns in that data, and then in the end, when you come back and you ask a question of it, it gives you a response based upon what you have taught it and how it is taught and how it's learned. That's how AI systems work. And it feels like this is such a new concept, but the reality is that AI has existed for a long period within universities. So I was born in Maryland, raised in Virginia and Florida, went to grad school in Houston, and then ended up at LSU for the past 22 years. But even as a doctoral student in Houston, I was working on AI and thinking about AI. But really, the reason why AI advanced so quickly over the past few years was because of the emergence of generative AI. Generative AI is a very specific type of AI that's capable of generating text, images, or media in response to prompts. And let's stop there for a moment. So we have to realize that generative AI is just one type of AI. There are others. So let's consider, for example, video. Let's think about when you watch a movie. And so I'm sure if you have Amazon Prime and you have X-ray turned on so you can see who the actor is. So one of the technologies that facilitates that is computer vision. That's where AI looks at pictures and audio and video to try to understand that. Maybe you've made a song with Sonos, and that's an example of audio, and you can make songs and be creative. Generative AI is just one particular branch of AI. Now, what's interesting about generative AI is that it's in response to prompts. Generative AI is conversational. Now, we've all used ChatGPT. We know that to be true. You're having a conversation with the AI system. Now, one of the reasons, if we kind of think, why does generative AI catch on so quickly? Well, think about it. We've all lived with these little devices in our homes for the last few years, and we've gotten used to talking to technology. And I'm specifically talking about Alexas and Google Homes. And excuse me if mine now talks to me in the background. We're used to talking to technology. So when generative AI came out, it felt very much like an outcome of what we already were used to doing. It was not necessarily new. But what generative AI does is it learns the patterns and the structure of what it's being trained on. Then when you ask it the question, it generates a response based upon how it's been trained. Just to level set, let's make sure we're all clear. There are 6 main platforms that are involved with generative AI. ChatGPT is, of course, the leading with about 2/3 of the market today, but we also have Claude. Meta has a product called Llama, which is open source. Gemini is by Google. Apple Intelligence has a version that lives on your phone. And then, of course, Grok was created by Elon Musk based upon Twitter. Now, each of these different 6 platforms was trained on different data. So if there's different data being trained, therefore we could expect that there's different outcomes that result from using these platforms. So let's give an example, though, of why this has become such a thing. Here's a quote: "I don't need Google anymore. Why would I use Google when I can just use ChatGPT to help me go through the search results and provide me with an answer?" Now, I have 4 kids as a second marriage, and they range from 16 to 20. Who said this? My daughter at the age of 14. I did ask her last night, "Grace, is it okay if I use your quote?" And of course, she said yes. Now, why is that so profound? What this shows us is that the way in which individuals are finding information today is dramatically different than any other time before. We're no longer searching through pages of Google results. We're using ChatGPT to surface results for us. Therefore, as we think about information-seeking behavior, we have to realize that it's different. Now, let's make it into a business perspective. Let's think about you running a business. Traditionally, when we think about generating marketing and increasing your awareness online, we talk about search engine optimization, SEO. However, increasingly, I think the future is not going to be an SEO. It's going to be upon the ability of you as a business to figure out how to ingest information into AI platforms, because a lot of people are going there to search. I'll give you an example. A couple months ago, my wife and I drove back from Washington, D.C. to Louisiana. I decided to let ChatGPT create our itinerary for us. It suggested where to stop, what restaurants to go to. Based on what it knows of us, it even suggested where to go from a historical perspective. We saw things in Chattanooga, and we saw things in all these different parts of Virginia that we never thought were there. I saw the largest pencil in Virginia. Never knew that existed. The point is that the way we find information today is dramatically different because of ChatGPT. And at LSU, we really ran into a problem. Our gymnast Olivia Dunn said, "If I need to get my creativity flowing for an essay that's due at midnight," and she promoted a new AI system. Of course, that created a lot of headlines around the university. We were in the AP, and we were, of course, in Sports Illustrated. And the university had to come out and say, "We hold on to the highest levels of academic integrity." But the reality is the way in which you as a student are doing your jobs today is fundamentally different. So it feels like AI came out of nowhere. So let's talk about where this really truly came from. In 2016, the major tech players all came together and they decided that they wanted to move AI out of the lab and into commercialization. So they invested around $1 billion to create a nonprofit that they call it OpenAI. Now, what's interesting is that was 9 years ago. How many of you were aware that this was truly happening in the background? They began working on GPT-1 in 2017. In 2018, Elon Musk, who was involved in the process, actually stepped away because he wanted to embed AI into Tesla, and GPT-1 was released. In 2019, it marked a very big change within OpenAI. They got an investment of $1 billion from Microsoft. All of a sudden, at that point, there became a very big conversation. Are you a nonprofit company or a for-profit company? That debate still is there today. If you look at what's happened in the past month, you see that OpenAI has restructured themselves to allow for both the nonprofit and the for-profit side. The debate, however, between the nonprofit and for-profit side continues to wage within OpenAI. In 2020, they began some of the work on GPT-3, and in 2021, they began to work on images. In December 2022, that's when the world changed. That's when ChatGPT-3 came out, and we all began to use generative AI. In 2023, they were valued at $29 billion, and Microsoft invested another $10 billion there as well. In 2024, we see ChatGPT-4 come out, and we saw a deep integration with Apple. At the end, I'll come back and talk about what we've seen this year and what we see in the future. But what I'm trying to do is lay a foundation for you so that you see that OpenAI and ChatGPT are not a flash in the pan. This is the culmination of a lot of work that led to this point. But what was most interesting from a purely research perspective is how long it took to achieve 1 million users. It took Netflix 3.5 years to hit 1 million users. It took Facebook 10 months, Spotify 5 months, Instagram 2 months, and ChatGPT 2 days. Now, if any of you are sitting out there and have a business plan with the idea of reaching 1 million users in 5 days, please let me know and I will invest right now, because that is extremely impressive as we think about the scalability of ChatGPT in that short amount of time. So where did it all come from? The way that it all came from is, first of all, the Common Crawl, eight years of web pages. Next, it came from Reddit, then internet-based books, and finally Wikipedia in English. Now, let's stop and pause there for a moment. If you're depending upon ChatGPT and the output from ChatGPT, you have to understand that what you're getting out depends on what went in. And all of those were served as the basis for ChatGPT. The reason we bring that up is think about Reddit as a great example. I'm a huge Reddit fan, but there's a lot of parts of Reddit which may or may not be applicable to the broader population. So you have a subset of the population that's creating this. But not only that, imagine if you posted on Reddit 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, did you know that your data was going to be used to crawl for ChatGPT? Certainly not. And there's a lot of implications there when it comes to data privacy and data protection as well, and your own personal data. So what did the engineers do? They took that data and they attempted to make sense of the data. Now, as your coursework, you all know that there's machine learning and deep learning. The difference between them is the nature of the algorithms. So ChatGPT took that lexicon of data and they allowed deep neural networks to be able to make sense of the structure of the data that they had. It took 1.76 trillion calculations or parameters to be able to make sense of that language. So we're talking about 300 billion words, 560 gigabytes of data, and 1.76 trillion parameters. So the engineers trained all the data using those parameters so that the AI system could learn the structure of the data that was contained therein. Then when we ask questions, it responds based upon how it was trained. Now, how about the other LLMs? Google says they're trained on, quote, a data set that is multimodal and multilingual. We don't know. Anthropic, a proprietary data set. Meta, a mix of publicly available data. Grok, Twitter or X. Point being, there's no transparency on what it is that's using to feed these LLMs. Without that level of transparency, how can you rely upon that for your organization? Now, at this point, you're going to say, wait, why did they have this guy come in and talk when he's so negative about AI? Oh, far from it. I'm actually an optimist when it comes to AI and AI solutions. But what I want you to see is that as we think about data privacy, as we think about data, every bit of data has a bias, and that data bias affects what happens. But the real reason why this was such a big deal is that for the first time, AI systems passed the Turing test. So what is a Turing test? The Turing test was said that if an AI acts like a person, we can deem that technology to be quote unquote intelligent. The Turing test came from the 1940s. So we're talking about a test that is about 80 years old. But for the first time, ChatGPT passed it. We put people in a room and they couldn't tell whether they were dealing with technology or dealing with a person. Because what happened was ChatGPT is able to take language and process it, to make sense of it, to represent it, and then to be able to reason and give you an answer. And not only that, it learns over time. So ChatGPT was the first to pass the Turing test. Now, here's the thing. Us as humans, we're very, very good at problem definition. We can figure out what the problem is that needs to get solved, and we can figure out what questions we need to answer. The role that Gen AI should play in your life and in the life of your organization is to help you arrive at the solution. And as we think about this paradigm, what I'm suggesting is the human needs to always stay in the loop. And that's why I call this where mind meets machine. Because if you can figure out how to frame the problem to AI in the right way, AI will help you with the solution. We're not here to take your job. We're not here to make it so that we don't need you. No. AI needs you to define the problem. But where AI can come in is to help you with the solution. because AI is more scalable. It never gets tired. It can last forever, and it can improve over time. But we have the experience and the training and the context. We know what questions we need to ask in order for AI to help us as well. And let me give you an example. So being at LSU, of course, this football season has been very dramatic for us as we've lost a coach and have a new coach, and it's been a mess. But before the season even began, I asked, what will LSU's record be in football this year? ChatGPT says with the 2024 season behind them, we seem to aim on their successes, and it's going to be up to us how we develop and return players. They never answered. Why didn't ChatGPT answer? It didn't answer because it was trained on data which is looking backwards. It can't make projections forward because it's not trained on projection data. It's trained on backward-facing data. Gemini. Analysts are projecting LSU to have a strong season, 8-4 to 10-2. We're missing the 10-2 days here. But if you look through here, the very last part of Gemini's answer, it says sites like 247 Sports and College Football News. What Gemini did is they grounded their answers in existing web data. That's a fundamental difference of approach between them and ChatGPT. How about Claude? Claude says, I don't know. I stopped learning in October. Another answer. Meta. To estimate their record, let's consider their performance and the strength of their opponents based on last year's start where they had one win. So what they did is they actually reasoned. They used reasoning. But the difference with Llama is Llama explained it to you. Look at that difference between ChatGPT versus Llama. Last one, and my favorite, X. Breaking it down, non-conference, LSU should hit a La Tech, Southeastern, and Western Kentucky. I'm going to pause for a moment there. We haven't even played Western Kentucky. We're playing them on Saturday, but X didn't know that. Clemson's a toss-up. So they reason it through. But my favorite part of this entire part is the very last sentence. My gut says 7-5, but college football is wild. Check back after a few games. Why did it respond in that way? Because it was trained on Twitter. And that's how people on Twitter talk. What you can see from this analysis is every AI has a personality. And that personality is based on how it was trained. So the foundations of AI is data. Being in Louisiana, oil and gas company, we of course have to say that data really is the new oil. Every company that you see in front of you right now, it has already signed an agreement with OpenAI so that they can be crawled. What does that show you? Data is the foundation of all AI, and all the AI systems realize it as well. And there's some thinking that we may actually hit the end of the ability to draw new data sources as well. So we've seen some controversy over the past 6 weeks or so. The Guardian had a story, for example, about an AI system that wouldn't shut itself down, or you see other type of negative stories as well. But the Guardian one, for example, particularly, what they were doing is they were using data from one AI system, the output from one AI system, to train another. So there's some thinking that we may actually arrive at a point where the output from one AI system may be used as training data for another. That shows you the importance of data today. So how do we go about interacting with our LLMs? That's where we see prompting. And if we look at it, every single different LLM looks largely the same in how we prompt our AI systems. It's all about the prompt. And here's a series of different books that you can see that talk to you about prompt engineering, because prompt engineering is about your ability to define the problem. And your ability to define the problem will also influence your ability to get the right answer. So I'm going to shift for a moment. We kind of have an idea of the foundations that are involved. Let's talk about what can happen once you start the process of prompting. And what I want to do now is spend a few minutes talking about some different prompting techniques. Now, I'm not going to go through and show these in practice because you'll be sitting there watching AI generate itself. What I want to do is simply give you some examples and give you some ways to think about prompting that may be a little bit different. So this is typically how we start when it comes to AI. We usually start by doing something that's very direct. So you may say something like very specific, and I can give you an example. So my wife and I were talking a few days ago. We're talking about New Kids on the Block, one of our favorite bands, right? We just got back from Las Vegas where we saw them in residency. So we started talking about them, and my wife said, I wish I knew all the different autobiographies that existed about New Kids on the Block. Open up ChatGPT, ask them something specific. Tell me all the autobiographies written about members of New Kids on the Block. Now, that doesn't require any context, but what that did is that enabled me to not necessarily have to worry about searching through Google. Maybe you want it to summarize something. So you upload a document and said, summarize this. Maybe you don't understand something. Explain blockchain to me. These are not contextual questions. These are very straightforward. And really, this is a surrogate for Google. List the 7 continents of the world. Convert 100 miles to kilometers. Define artificial intelligence. These are all suitable use cases for AI systems and generative AI. But we have to keep in mind, as you do this, it doesn't know anything about you or the reason why you're asking the question. So let's say, for example, that you're starting, our example, a consulting company. What would a direct prompt look like? I'm starting a consulting company. Where should I start? You can see that that's a very fundamental, easy question, and you can see yourself asking that about AI as well. But what's the problem? What type of consulting company? What's your target market? What do I know about you? What do you need advice on? So you see that the direct approach is great, but it doesn't actually ask for requirements. What are you trying to consider? What is inbounds? What is out of bounds? What tone do you want to talk? Is this conversational or is this more serious? So direct prompting has a role, but it's also very limiting. So let's talk about the next approach. Let's go to an instructional prompt. What if you take this direct prompt, but you limit it in some context? So let's give us some example. So information, maybe you need some information. So here's an example. I need a list of the top most effective ways to craft a message in social media where I don't know where to start based on research. Let's pause for a moment. Let's contrast this with the previous one. What if you just said, I need a list of the top 3 most effective ways to craft a message in social media? Well, what's the difference here? Now you're saying, I don't know where to start. So you're giving it context. So AI will then say, all right, let's start from the beginning. Second one, I'm in charge of social media at a consulting company. Tell me how to craft a message. You contextualize it to your context. Now look at the difference between the first two. In the first one, you could run a hair salon. It could be some other type of business. It's not necessarily a consulting company, but now you put the context in. Think about this. If you frame it for a consumer-facing business, your social media is going to be a whole lot different than if it's a business-to-business arrangement. The context contextualizes that in an important way. Formatting. What if you want it like in a table format? Give me the list of the top 3 best practices, but give me the pros and cons in table format. So now rather than having to copy and paste it and move it around, you format it for you. Last, I need a list of the top 3 best practices and tell me why each is important. You've been very specific. Maybe your boss has said, tell me why. So you can see that within this context, it matters. So in our example, I could say, I need a list of how to create a social media campaign for a technology-based consulting company where our target market is XYZ. You see that the more that you layer on context, the more direct your answers are going to be. Now, the other thing you can do is, in addition to giving it information, you can tell it what not to do. You can constrain it. You can constrain it by the length. You can constrain it by the number of items, like 3 versus 5. The level of detail. You can have a specific format. You can structure it in a way that's important. So for example, start with an introduction, then have a main points and a conclusion. You can tell it to identify sources or to exclude information or to include information. You can guide the AI in a way that it assists you by constraining it and providing instruction along the way. So before we go on, I want to give another example that's outside of the consulting company, and I'll give you an example of a organization that I talked with as well. So a friend of mine runs a salon. So he was looking to take over his social media and allow ChatGPT to come up with a social media plan for his salon. So we started with direct prompting. We said, come up with a social media plan for a salon, and we let it go. And it was good. It was fantastic. It told us what to do, when to do. But then we began to layer on constraints. I said, next, tell me what you know about this salon in Youngsville, Louisiana. ChatGPT went out and did research on the salon based upon what it had online, and it came back and it said, the target market for this salon is suburban women in rural Louisiana. Okay, fine. Then I said, now redo the social media plan given what you know about the salon. All of a sudden, that got contextualized. It was suggested, for example, post it on Instagram at 9 a.m. because suburban women tend to check Instagram between 9 and 11 a.m. That constraint allowed the message to be delivered in a lot more nuanced way. So as you instruct your LLM, you can construct it with a way such that you tell it a lot more in detail. All right, the next technique, a persona, my favorite. A persona is a character or an archetype that you adopt. It's a way to have a specific tone of you. So, for example, let's take an example of something that I do in my work, and then we'll go back to our consulting company example. What I'll do is I'll take a concept, for example, and maybe I'm struggling to communicate that to my students. I'll say, act as a university student. Now, and then I would ask AI to act in that way as I'm crafting a response back. Let me give you a consulting company example. Let's say that you as a consulting company have a target market. You're targeting SMEs with less than $10 million in revenue with some XYZ type of product you're trying to sell. You could say, act as a target customer. What are my points of pain? You can have AI operate in a way that can allow you to not only understand your perspective, but the other perspective as well. I had an example of a company where this particular manager had a bunch of employees that were kind of acting up and having a tough time. She said, act as a manager who's having her direct reports having XYZ problems. How should I act? The persona actually asks AI to act like you. Now, as you know, if you interact with AI enough, it gets to know you. And so it's gotten to the point now where I interact with it so many times that I can say, act as me to write an email. Act as me to write a bio. So you can have AI act as you or take on a persona. So what are some things you can include in your persona? Maybe your hobbies, your interests, your background, your academic background. How do you want to communicate? Are you very formal or very informal? What are your goals? What are your values? What are your preferences from language or culture? Anything very specific. You can build a persona, and in building that persona, you can begin to formulate very specific responses to what you're achieving. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of advanced techniques as well that the systems have largely implemented as well, but just so you can be aware of some things you could do. One is a chain of thought. One of the problems with AI sometimes is it comes up with an answer, but you don't know how or why it came up with an answer. Well, you know what you can do? Ask it. That's chain of thought. What you can do is say, all right, break down this problem for me and help me to understand your thinking. So you can prompt AI to help you to understand how it's thinking. What that does for you is it begins for you to help to understand how you could reframe the problem that you're asking. Another one, maybe you're at a point where you want AI to help guide you, but there's decisions you need to make along the way. So let's take our consulting company, for example. Let's say that you're creating a marketing plan for a technology consulting company, and you think that you have a series of different target customers that you want to employ. So you could say, for example, help me create a social media marketing campaign targeting XYZ company. Help me to create it, but ask me questions for input along the way. So AI could come back and say, what platforms do you have? LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. And you can ask AI to interview along the way. So all you have to do for this is say, as you're answering this question, ask me questions that will help you answer your questions. Now you see AI doing that. If you use ChatGPT in particular, sometimes they'll come back and say, here's 3 or 4 questions to answer. That's one example of that, but you can actually ask it to do that for you as well. Now, what if AI doesn't have the data you want it to have? That's called RAG. RAG is retrieval augmented generation. This says, I'm going to tell you where to look for information. So let's pretend you're the consulting company. What you could do is you could say, first, begin by looking at all the best practices that exist for consulting companies in XYZ information. You tell it what other information you want included in order for you to get a better answer. That is known as RAG. And what you can do is you can tell it where to look. The next one is react. React is where you ask AI to maybe slow down. It asks that model to reflect on what you're asking and then act by generating a response. So for example, I had AI come up with an answer which I clearly could see that it was very quick, great, but it wasn't accurate. So my response back to AI was, slow down, take your time, do research, and come back to me with a better answer. It did. It stopped, it did some external research, and the answer was better. So if you find that the answer is too quick, you can tell it to slow down, to think. Oftentimes, what I'll even do is I'll upload a document and say, tell me what you see in this document. So a lot of times before I give a lecture such as this, I'll upload my lecture to ChatGPT and said, think about this lecture and tell me what I'm missing. It can allow it to slow down and really think about what its answer as well. Lastly, what if you just don't trust it? What if you think, you know what, I don't know where it's getting information? You know what you can do? Ask. A technique called chain of verification, or COVE. What you can do is you could say, help me to verify what you're telling me. So what it will do is it'll generate a response, and then you can verify if what it said is accurate or not. I'm going to take my New Kids on the Block example further for you. So the way this all started was my wife said, I wish I could read a biography about each member. Well, I wasn't sure if AI knew who all the members of New Kids on the Block were. So I said, ChatGPT, I want you to come up with a list of all of the autobiographies and biographies from the band New Kids on the Block. First, list all the members and verify that you have accurately found them. Then search for the autobiographies. So what happened is it came back and it said, here's a list of who I think is in New Kids on the Block. Am I right? And I said, yes. Why did I do that? Because I didn't want hallucinations. A hallucination is when AI doesn't know because it doesn't have the answer, doesn't have the data implicit in the training. So if you're not sure, ask it to make sure it can confirm beforehand. Now, one of the questions I get a lot is, how do I assess my prompts? How do I find if they're good or not? There's two frameworks that get you to thinking about your assessing your prompts. One's RACA and the other one's RAGAS. Now, these are not objective, meaning you can't score this. I can't go in and give you a measure of 0 to 100. Now, we're going to circulate these slides for sure, so you can look at this in greater detail. But one way to think about it is to think about each of your slides through this particular lens. Now, one thing that you could do, for example, is ChatGPT and Gemini are aware of these assessment tools. You can ask ChatGPT, assess the prompt I gave to you based upon the RACA framework. What that'll do is it enables you to learn how to better prompt, because it's that interaction that's going to give you clarity. But the other area where this gives you some assistance is, as you think about your prompts, think about what you're asking. Make sure that it's relevant. Make sure it's accurate. For example, don't ask, tell me about the last time that Einstein went to the moon. There's not going to be accurate. I will tell you it'll generate a response, but it won't be right. So think about this as you assess your prompts. What if your prompts are more complicated? That one of the coolest things that you can create are custom GPTs. Custom GPTs are where you create a GPT specific to a specific use case. They allow you to use your own data. Now, and then you also may be familiar with Notebook LLM. They use the same kind of approach here as well, which is using your own data. So we've seen kind of a little bit about the origins of AI, where it came from, and we've seen about the importance of prompts. Now let's pivot. You're all busy working professionals who are trying to lead your organizations. As we think about the future, as we think about this year and ahead, what does it mean to lead an organization the AI way? To understand that we need to contrast traditional leadership versus AI-based leadership. Traditionally, the way you moved up in an organization was based on experience. You built teams of humans. You had the ability to understand what was going on and create teams around you. Now, change was very predictable, very incrementally, and everything was very stable. And if we give you advice on how to raise the corporate ladder, it was based on IQ and EQ. Again, IQ is the ability for you to know knowledge. EQ is based on more emotions and emotional responses. AI has upended that dramatically. Now you're working on a team not only with humans, you're working with agents. We call this agentic AI. You're working alongside of a technology agent, and you may or may not know that to be true. That means that the way we approach our decision making has to be data driven. Now, I know you're going to say we've had this paradigm forever with analytics, and you're right to a certain point. But now we've taken it even further because the rate of disruption and innovation is happening quicker than ever before. And what that means for you is that you need to figure out how to upskill and reskill yourself and assimilate AI skills into your jobs. That's why I commend you so much for coming back to Newstate, a university that's focused 100% on preparing leaders for the future of AI. Because really, if we look at what's going to allow people to ascend an organization now, not only is it IQ and EQ, now we're adding one more equation, which is TQ, which is the technology quotient. You have to be able to understand AI. And as we strategize about this decision, as we strategize about what AI you should implement in your companies, we have to consider the framework of how we approach how you make decisions about IT. Now, traditionally, the way we have teach about decision making with IT is we say that organizations that will be effective are effective if their strategy, their operations, and technology all align together. It's IT business alignment. And for the entire time that I've been a faculty member as a researcher, I've used this paradigm within my MBA classes, other classes, to explain why individuals or corporations make decisions around technology. And it's held to be true. Well, AI comes about and you think, all right, let's see if this paradigm works for AI. So we came up with a list of the 10 reasons why we thought people would invest in AI. It would improve the cost structure. It would improve the well-being of their employees. I would be able to trust these decisions without having to oversee them. It wouldn't really impact my workforce too much. If it got too out of hand, then I could actually stop it. I could get some new insights and I have confidence in those insights and it's clear. It provides me new capabilities and new functionality. And if you think about it, these are logical things, right? And for 22 years, I've used a subset of these to understand why people adopt ERP or knowledge management or document management. So you would think AI is the same. For the first time, I can tell you AI is not the same. So what we made presidents of multinational companies do is we gave them a survey and we made them trade off. What if it may improve the cost structure of your organization, but you have to fire a whole lot of people? What would you do? Well, as a business professor, you always think all that they care about is money and the bottom line. Interesting, that's not what we found. We found the number reason why organizations were adopting AI was to improve the well-being of their employees. And you're going to say, well, that sounds terrible. That can't be true. That's not business-like. And I didn't believe it either, to be frank. So I decided to do some additional research and reach out to the organizations that I knew that were adopting AI at a deep level. I talked to a Fortune 50 bank, and he said, yes, we're using AI in the call center. And I said, answer solved, to cut jobs. And his response was, no, not at all, to make the call center jobs better. I said, well, how? He said, one of the big problems we have is natural language is you call into your bank and hit 1 for this, hit 2 for that. He said, it annoys everybody. So they created a natural language approach where you just talk. When you call in this bank, they say, welcome to XYZ Bank. Tell me why you're here. And it's conversational. The AI is acting like an agent, a call agent. Why? Because he said 90% of what we deal with is transferring money from the checking account to the savings account. AI can do that. So by the time that you as a caller arrive to the underlying agent, the agent knows that they're dealing with a complicated problem and they're not dealing with something very, very simple. What happened is that satisfaction among employees went up, customer retention went up. Second example, I had this other small company and they were looking at HR. They were trying to figure out how can we make our HR processes better? And they decided to start with their end of year evaluation. It's getting to that point in December, right? We're all going to get our annual reviews. So how do we make this process better? So they uploaded the review document into AI and said, how do we improve this? AI came back and said, you're doing a good job of looking backwards, but you're not looking forward. Why aren't you asking your employees, what do they want to accomplish in the next year? Then you as a company can help that happen. It made them stop and realize that they weren't being true partners to their employees. So they created a wellness program, a scholarship program, an educational program. What happened? Employee retention went up. The bottom line went up. Why? Their employees were taken care of. These findings aren't new, but AI is going to play a huge role in employee well-being moving forward. And I think we're going to hit a point where we're going to see that employee well-being is one of the most fundamentally important aspects of driving your organization's success. So why do companies implement AI? There are 5 basic reasons why companies AI: automation, knowledge, service, to build a platform, and to create a better relationship between technology and the human. Let's talk about those first 5. 1, automated. One of the reasons why organizations are adopting AI is to automate things. My investment banks use a variety of different training platforms that requires a different manual checks and inputs. I can see us using AI to automate. We have a lot of content. If AI became more prominent, we can see a lot more articles written by AI or code written by AI, automating things. Now, in both these cases, both of these presidents said that they were not going to fire people to do this. Let me be clear. Number 2, knowledge. Deeper insights, deeper inferences. It'll mean more control over quality services. I can see nothing but improvement because of the knowledge. The knowledge. Another example. Oil and gas company uses pumps. Well, this particular gentleman that I knew said, I have all these pumps and they fail all the time. I want to know why they're failing. So he went to the CEO and said, I need some money to begin to understand why our pumps are failing. The way that the process worked in the company is they sent a technician out, and the technician would fix it, and they would complete a work order. He had 40 years of work order. He basically had an entire football field of work orders, and he wanted to figure out what was happening. Well, the CEO, of course, wasn't having it. So as a pet project, he scanned it all in, used OCR, and then he began to understand why his pumps were failing. He got so amazing with what he did. He actually figured out not only why they were failing, he could predict when they were going to fail. That's knowledge. That's insight. By the way, he ended up getting funding for that project. Number 3, service. Chatbots. How do I create personalized interactions with customer service? That's service enhancement. Number 4, how can I actually integrate AI into my company? So for example, I think there may be very few jobs handled by people, a few people at a high level, and a lot of AI experts. Lastly, AI-human symbiosis. This is where we're going to see human and agentic AI truly working together. Now that sounds really overwhelming, right? Because that's the end. But I think what we're going to see is most companies are starting with automation, going to knowledge and analytics, then to service, and then to that deeper level as well. This pathway is the pathway that I project AI will evolve. But not every company will be the same. Some companies will just pursue one of those 5. Others will pursue multiple ones. What's the difference? Typically, if you're a small to medium-sized company, you'll go with one of them, with one priority, one execution mechanism, one governance. The problem is the benefits that you will achieve will be very narrow, and you may not learn from that process as well. In contrast, most large organizations are going to go with 2, 3, or 4 of those simultaneously. That's going to give them synergy and accelerate innovation, but the problem is that's going to become complicated very, very quickly. So why are companies doing it? 5 competitive advantages that we foresee from AI. 1 is operational efficiency. 2 is customer service, innovation, decision-making, and speed and agility. This is what we believe will come as you embrace AI inside of your organization, as long as you can overcome the barriers: money, talent, skills, data, culture, and legal. The big ones. Cost. This is not cheap. If you look right now, you see that there's the recent survey from MIT found that about 50% of organizations are seeing low ROI from their deployment of generative AI. Gartner has said we're in the trough of disillusionment. Why? Because if you think about the quality of the training, ChatGPT was not trained on corporate data, it was trained on Reddit. So therefore, organizations are finding that the source of that data matters a lot, and they're not seeing the benefits that they thought. So they're having to invest money into a product that they thought that they could pay $20 a month per user to do. Talent. Universities are catching up, but it's taking us a while to get these AI graduates out. Why am I so optimistic about it? Let me give you a personal example. So I have an 18-year-old son who's now a freshman at LSU. But when he was a senior in high school, he got hired as a junior AI developer for $15 an hour. He graduated high school, he got a raise to $30 an hour. I moved into the dorm. He is now a freshman getting $50 an hour as a senior AI developer. Oh, and by the way, he's the hiring manager for AI. There's a lack of talent, but there's also a lot of talent out there if you can find it. Data. Companies struggle to get their data ready for analytics, and it's just getting worse now. Culture. People are afraid of their jobs, and they have a right to be. It's up to you to act as a change agent to tell them why not to get concerned, to get scared. And legal. Right now, 41 different states have different laws around AI. We have a patchwork of AI laws as we move along with that, then there's also ethical concerns about what we deem to be important or not. All right, some key takeaways here from an organizational perspective. One, AI has to be aligned with business outcomes. Two, you have to be responsible and create ethical AI. Third, you have to enact cultural change to see this investment materialize. Fourth, you have to upskill or reskill your employees. I believe in AI cradle to grave. Everyone needs to know AI, and everyone needs to come to Newstate to learn. Next, you need to move from a pilots to scale this at an enterprise-wide. Start small, build over time. Go from exploration to transformation. Build data, build governance, and view AI not from the perspective of technology, but from strategy. I teach my students what I call the golden rule. There's no such thing as a technology project. There's just business projects that are about technology. So as I draw to a close in my last few minutes here, let's look ahead. What has happened in 2025? Well, increasingly, instead of large language models, we're seeing much more smaller language models. We're seeing language models targeting specific verticals like law and health. So we're seeing smaller language models. We're seeing advances in hardware and computation. This requires a lot of computational power in order to execute all these models. We're seeing an increased focus on that. For example, here in Louisiana, we're actually seeing one of the biggest data centers in the entire world being built. And it's going to be the size of Manhattan inside of Louisiana. And all that's going to require more space and more servers and more energy. We're seeing AI becoming integrated more into our lives. I don't know about you, but as I mentioned those examples, I'm using Google a whole lot less. I'm turning to AI, and more people are. Earlier, I talked about how it's all text-based. We're going to increasingly see multimodal language models training on video and audio. I think about this as an example. This interaction that we're having right now is not even being used to train AI models. So as we're doing this and having these conversations, it's not even being used to train. Let me put this a different way. The only type of text so far that's being trained on AI has been the written text. We talk different than we write, but yet we haven't trained an AI model on how we talk. Lastly, more approaches for training and fine-tuning as well. So let me conclude here by giving you a checklist. Here are some things that you can help to adopt AI in a clear way. One, leadership. This is why it's so important that you come back and learn leadership skills. You will be the champion in your organization. You need to set the vision. Two, get buy-in, build trust, align your stakeholders, let them know what's coming. Third, workforce readiness. Everyone cradle to grave should have training in AI. Everyone in your company should have AI. I think we're going to hit a point where just like we all have to take cybersecurity training, I very well think we may all need AI training at some point. Next, make sure you look at your frameworks and assess where you're at. Do not rush into AI. If you rush in, you're going to very quickly discover that you're going to hit that trough of delusionment also, because your organization just may not be ready. Start with the pilot, get feedback, then scale. And lastly, monitor it. Threats are coming, so make sure that you're looking at what come against your AI. Now, I'm going to draw to a close here, and I want to draw to a close by moving to a more macro level. Everyone's scared. The level of anxiety over jobs is palatable. If you build AI the right way, it won't take your job away, but what it will do is it'll take away those boring tasks that drag you down, that are monotonous. So let me ask you, could you imagine your life if all the routines of life were gone, and you could imagine focusing on what matters? And what matters is people, critical and people from an abstract perspective, but from a business perspective, it's about critical thinking and strategic sense making and these higher level concepts that AI can't do. But maybe we'll hit a point, and this is my hope and dream, where AI actually may make us more human. In August, my wife and I were in Jamaica, and we watched the sunset. And as we watched the sunset, this is what I saw. And I can look at this picture right now, and I can tell you how I felt in that moment. AI could never describe that sunset to me. What we can do is let's use AI to make us more human. Give us more sunsets. Give us more time with our family and our kids and watch them grow up and really enjoy our lives. Let's stop working so hard and let's use AI to do it for us and build a future that is equitable and successful for all. You're going to say, you know what, you're just some professor and all you care about is education so you could keep your job. All right, good point. Let me provide you with a closing statement here to tell you why that's not true. So I told you a little about my history and where I came from, but I neglected the earlier part of the story. So my grandparents were sixth grade educated farmers in rural Hungary. My grandfather fought with the Russians in World War II, but decided to escape to America to make a better life for his kids. My father was actually born in a displaced persons camp in Germany. He spent the first 18 months of his life in and out of rail cars until the Presbyterian Church brought him over to rural Pennsylvania. My grandparents spoke no English, just Yiddish. My grandmother was a factory worker. My grandfather was a trucker. My dad was the first to go to high school, the first to go to college, the first to get a master's degree. I got a PhD. My grandfather, when he was passing away, looked at me and said, I listened to Hitler on the radio, and he was trying to influence the next generation. He said, but you're going to teach the next generation. In 2 generations, I went from sixth grade educated Yiddish farmers to getting a PhD at a major university, to my son, who now wants to get a PhD in AI. If you're feeling down like you can't do it because the world is stacked against you, you can do it. But you can do it because of education. And you made the right step. You came to Newstate, and you came to a place where you can future-proof your career for the AI economy. You made the right move. Don't get discouraged. Finish your degree and finish it strong, and let's prepare for the workforce of tomorrow. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm happy to address any questions that you may have.
Andrew, thank you so much for that. Every time I talk to you, I learn something. It's amazing, and I learned a lot today. We do have a few questions for those of you who are unfamiliar with this platform or where the Q&A feature is. If you look at your 9 box in the bottom right corner of your screen, you click on that, and then there is a thing that says Q&A. So our first question here is someone saying, I'm not an AI expert. What is the most important single skill that you think professionals will need to have in AI?
Easy, prompt engineering. I think you need to start with get the basics of AI. And by that, I don't mean, it's daunting, right? I get it. All that math and all those neural networks, that sounds so scary. It's not, but it sounds like it. You start by just getting these fundamentals. What is it? How does it work? And then learn prompt engineering. Picked up a book on prompting. Become a prompting expert. Become the person in the office that everyone comes to and says, oh, that person knows to prompt. That's going to get you some opportunities and some insights. I was on a team yesterday, and I was the prompting person, right? I was the one that did the prompts. Become that person, because that's how you're going to keep yourself AI proof as well. And things change. Keep up to date with it. Become that change agent inside your company.
Love it. Love it. All right, a question about employment. We're hearing about these large job cuts by large employers. What do you think is going to happen with the economy and AI?
Sure. I'm going to put aside today's jobs report, in case you haven't seen it, was up 191,000, I think. So let's put aside that, because that was kind of an anomaly. And let's look at the one before it. So there's a lot of decrying how not as much jobs are added in the last economy. And there was some questions about the role that AI played. Here's what I see as happening based upon my interviews with recruiters and executives. I think what's happening is AI is not resulting in people being fired. I think AI is resulting in people not being replaced. So in other words, what's happening is the nature of the job is changing, and the requirements for the job are changing. So what's happening is they're taking a look at open job positions and saying, what can we do with AI for this job? Then they'll move AI to do those tasks, and you'll move to a higher level. So I think what's happening is we're just seeing replacement, but we're not seeing taking over yet. That's not to say it's not going to happen. But a way to think about it is this. Could you envision your job being done with AI? If you can envision it, it will happen. So you need to reimagine your job and think about the value add that you have that AI can't do. So that's the place where you need to get to from a jobs perspective.
Yeah, definitely good advice. Oh, and here is a question that looks like it is about, I love this. Occasionally a response to a straightforward question is just plain wrong.
Absolutely.
When this happens, I've tried to pay it forward by correcting the response, and without exception, the next reply acknowledges why the response was wrong. will the next person get the corrected answer?
Not necessarily. It requires a lot more training data than that. But you raise a point that I think is important to all this. So in my class, for example, in my MBA class, you would think, in my face-to-face at LSU, you would think I must let my students run wild with AI. Actually, no, they don't. You're actually not allowed to use AI in my class until about halfway through. And the reason why is the example you just brought up. Students, if you rely too much on AI without domain knowledge, that's not a place you want to get to. You will be found out, I promise. You cannot bluster your way through this. If you don't know, don't rely on AI to be your expert, because you will be found out in some capacity. And I've stuffed this out with students in the past. They've come to me with something and I could tell it's AI generated, so I'll probe. Sure enough, AI generated. Don't be that person. Get domain knowledge first, then use AI to make you better. So for example, in my class, halfway through, you're allowed to use it once you can tell me if what it comes up with is right or wrong. So that's an important aspect and important learning, as well as those hallucinations.
Yep. Being able to poke holes. Absolutely. And to ask the questions of AI, right? All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew. This was amazing. And thank you for everyone who logged in to see our very first webinar. And we will also be posting this online. Thank you so much.
Thank you.